After Sami Zayn and Chad Gable's Intercontinental title bout at WWE's Clash at the Castle, Twitter user Backup Hangman posted his thoughts about the match. It said in midway that Chad was losing because they still haven't gotten to the next phase of Alpha Academy's story. The match was annoying. The work was strong because of course, but the melodrama stuff got in the way and the pacing of the story is too slow for me. I'd imagine the official breakup is on Monday. User JobberNationTV then chimed in with a rather aggressive response. Once again, you're wrong. This isn't AEW. WWE isn't just booking bangers for no reason. They're telling a story. So far, it's been perfectly booked. You would be terrible and creative. Now, we could simply chalk this up to an insecure WWE fan having his tribalism get the better of him.
We're retribalizing. Involuntarily, we're getting rid of individualism.
And while that's certainly the case, I gotta admit he does have a point about AEW. This perspective isn't anything new. It's been a common complaint about the company for a while now. Grifting podcasters who used to be in the pro wrestling business and quite successful in it will now compare Tony Khan to a teenage fan booking dream matches between his new favorite toys only for them to be tossed aside and forgotten after a few weeks. There are really only two American wrestling companies that have cultural relevance in 2024, WWE and, to a far lesser extent, AEW. WWE fans will make fun of Tony Khan and its fans by claiming the company doesn't know how to tell stories. And AEW fans will counter by calling WWE fans e-drones, an insult that is meant to suggest they're mindless robots who blindly follow WWE's propaganda model. AEW is a 5-year-old company, and it's kind of a miracle they've grown as much as they have within such a short period of time, especially with the faces of the company never having worked for WWE. But their growth has stagnated as internal politics within the company forced its biggest star out and back into the arms of WWE. WWE has branded itself the brand, the star, for over 2 decades now. Many people will complain that their biggest weakness may be that, thanks to the monopoly, they've forgotten how to create new stars. But they received a huge shot of adrenaline when Cody Rhodes, the one founding member of AEW who had previously worked for WWE, returned to the company, recast as its prodigal son who had finally returned home. Keep in mind that during Cody's first stint with WWE, he was never taken seriously as a main event talent. That only happened after his time on the Independents and AEW, which a lot of WWE fans don't want to mention because it contradicts the reality that former owner Vince McMahon failed to create new stars. But ultimately, none of this matters for 2 reasons. 1, Vince McMahon was able to monopolize American wrestling, thus nullifying the need to make new stars. And 2, his removal has allowed the promotion to rebrand its image as it has become as culturally relevant as it's been in 25 years, despite being investigated for sex trafficking for the second time in 32 years. WWE has rectified some of their issues, like the removal of Vince McMahon, an alleged sex pest and just all-around unpleasant human being who seems more concerned with confining pro wrestling to his very limited idea of what it should be, while trying everything in his power to eliminate what he didn't like about it. Paul Levesque, Vince's son-in-law, now runs the creative in the company, and he's reestablished a lot of goodwill by adopting a common-sense booking approach. It's fairly standard good versus evil stuff, but the company's storytelling had been so laughably bad for so long that it was enough to reestablish the good vibes. It'd be like if Joe Biden was ousted from office by, I don't know, choose any plain Jane 55-year-old heteronormative liberal, and you have a pretty good idea of who Paul Levesque is. And Levesque is in many ways the same king, but with a kinder face. He refuses to answer hardball media questions about his father-in-law's gross sexual misconduct by reminding us that WWE is back to doing incredible business, selling out shows left and right. And he's certainly right about that. The removal of McMahon was something the company desperately needed because pro wrestling had become unbearably niche under his archaic creative vision. I stopped watching wrestling after the WWE monopoly in 2001, which coincidentally is when Paul Levesque became its most prominently featured talent, would remain so for most of the decade. I didn't stop watching because I felt morally inclined to do so. I was a selfish teenager. It was rather because I found him to be insufferably boring as a performer. So, as an institution, WWE is still making creative decisions that simply don't match up to my tastes, with or without McMahon. Supporting AEW felt validating and meaningful because there were a lot of fans like me who were fed up with the way Vince McMahon and the promotion treated us. We weren't individual fans with unique interests and perspectives, we were homogenized into the WWE universe. This is something I plan on discussing in its own video, but I bring it up here to illustrate that AEW is definitely not perfect. And this brings me back to Jobber Nation's point about AEW wrestlers wrestling for the sake of wrestling. AEW has an incredible pool of talent, yes, but there's no one currently featured who I care about in the way I care about Chad Gable in WWE. Because it isn't the triumphant story of Cody Rhodes, the captivating return of Hollywood's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or even the improbable return of CM Punk after famously walking out of the company 10 years ago that has me back watching WWE content. It is Chad Gable's tragic obsession with winning the Intercontinental title that has once again made me a reluctant participant of the WWE universe. Look, real talk. I'm an AEW fan. I identify myself as an AEW fan. I put it out there that it's my company. I'm an AEW homer. I try to be as anti-tribalist as I can with that stance, but it's a hard pill to swallow. But WWE, especially in Chad Gable's case, is just doing wrestling storytelling better right now. And what Chad Gable is doing is more interesting than anything AEW has done, even in their main event scene and lately. And it comes down to it's this tragedy, and it's really simple, which wrestling at its best is. It's simplistic populist entertainment that isn't really political, and that, you could say that has its problems. Chad Gable entered WWE with incredible hype after his 2016 run in NXT with tag team partner Jason Jordan, calling themselves American Alpha. They were a team of exceptional athletes with a substantial amateur background. Gable was promoted to WWE soon after and followed the unfortunate trend of other NXT hopefuls. Vince McMahon, fueled by spite, pettiness, and increased levels of dementia, decided to make Gable into a punchline in 2019 by rebranding him Shorty G. It was a unanimously unpopular decision among fans, but it didn't matter because Vince was content with his monopoly on American wrestling. A ruthless dictator who had the final say on all creative decisions within the company. Gable would start to be featured more prominently after Vince's removal in 2022, culminating in his most significant storyline with the company in summer of 2023, when he began his pursuit of his first singles title in the WWE, the Intercontinental Championship. The most talented of wrestlers are able to play both the role of face and heel effortlessly. Chad Gable was able to take what little Vince McMahon had given him and turn it into fuel to become one of wrestling's most endearing babyfaces during his 2023 feud with reigning Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion Gunther. Gunther is, in my opinion, WWE's most captivating heel. Because he's not a heel because he's a dastardly villain, he doesn't even cheat by using his Imperium stable to win matches, a common trope in wrestling. Instead, he's bad simply by being so dominant. And as a jaded fan, I find his no-nonsense dominance refreshing and delightful. Nothing he does looks pretty, which is precisely what makes him stand out in an era that has become increasingly obsessed with memorization of sequences designed to impress rather than stimulate emotion. The two matches between Chad Gable and Gunther are the polar opposite of what's to come between Sami Zayn and Chad Gable in 2024. Here, Chad is the underdog, but he isn't outmatched by Gunther's superior size because Gable's an actual Olympian, like the man so many have compared himself to, Kurt Angle. Gable models himself after Angle by possessing equal amounts comedy and seriousness in his approach to wrestling. The combination of shoot-style acumen and earnest patriotism is a surefire way to win over the WWE Universe. As a babyface, he has a sincere focus, and with Vince McMahon out of the company, he can now be taken seriously as one of WWE's most gifted performers. Gable defeats Gunther in their first match, the first man to do so since his legendary Intercontinental title reign began. Gunther's arrogance gets the better of him as he goes outside the ring to taunt his opponent, reminding him that he's the ring general. The Olympian takes exception to this, pounding his skull off the ring post and then German suplexing the ring general over the barricade and into the stands before running into the ring just barely to beat the referee's 10 count. Unfortunately, the win happens via countout, meaning Gable doesn't win the championship. The rematch happens in front of Gable's family, which greatly increases the stakes. Like Angle, there are times he's able to chop his larger opponent down to size, grounding him on the mat with amateur submissions, most notably with the ankle lock. But Gunther's size, ring awareness, and sheer brute force proves to be too much for Gable to handle. McMahon did name him Shorty for a reason, after all. But the smaller man isn't going to go down that easy. He ducks a wild clothesline, running off the ropes with determination, shaking off a headlock attempt by reversing it into a beautiful backdrop suplex. The Austrian tries to recover, but the Olympian is in position to hit him with a delayed rolling German suplex that is more impressive than anything I will ever do with my life. But Gunther kicks out at 2. Another attempt at the ankle lock, but Gunther is able to slide onto his back and deliver stiff boots to Gable's face. Quicker than a hiccup, Gable's in a headlock. It's one of the most elementary moves in wrestling, and yet Gunther is talented enough to make it a deadly transition move to set up the finish. Without letting go, the general drops Gable onto the top of his head, following up with a powerbomb, a stiff lariat, and the win. Gable went from almost tapping the man out to being dead in the matter of 15 seconds. It's another showcase of Gunther's exceptional dominance. It's kind of like when a scrappy underdog team scores a couple early touchdowns on the favorite, catching them off guard. But then, seemingly out of nowhere and before you can blink, the superior team rattles off a few touchdowns and the game inexplicably becomes a blowout. Gable's daughter is crying ringside. All that hope and determination gone in 3 simple moves. It is such a good match. It is such a good match that Joseph Monticello, who is, like me, very critical and suspicious of WWE, and he even put this match in his top 20 list for 2023. And it was the only WWE match that was on there. So that should tell you right there how good, not just how good Gunther is, but how good Chad Gable is. Gable is a failure in front of his family, but he promises to beat Gunther someday in the future, restoring his dignity. But he never gets another rematch. Instead, he coaches Sami Zayn, another beloved underdog, to be the man to finally beat Gunther. And on the biggest stage possible, WrestleMania, the showcase of the Immortals. And Sami Zayn does just that. He ends Gunther's dominant reign at 666 days, over 200 days longer than the Honky Tonk Man. Zayn gives Gable a title shot because he's grateful to his mentor. And it's a friendly competition. 2 of WWE's workhorses duking it out. Gable comes up short. And even worse, Sammy's wife is there to witness her husband's triumph. He can't fake it anymore. Sami Zayn isn't just the better performer, he's the better man. The fans love him like they used to love Mick Foley. How can you possibly compare to that? The humiliation of being overlooked by Vince, the devastation of losing in front of his family, and now the unbearable reality of losing to the man he coached to finally beat Gunther. And that's when Chad Gable proves he's even better as a heel, because he suplexes Sami Zayn literally out of the arms of his wife.
Wait a minute! Gable from behind!
He begins emotionally abusing his stable Alpha Academy, displacing his frustrations with the Intercontinental title onto his teammates.
That should have been me with my daughter celebrating in the front row with my championship. But I was wasting my time training Sami Zayn. I've been wasting my time training a bunch of freaking losers. And Maxine. Sweet Miss Maxine. Pretty as a princess, right? But dumb as a box of rocks. Lord. Oh.
And it's here that we see the emergence of another storyline, Otis.
And don't even get me started on you. Otis, my prize pupil, my #1 guy.
Otis isn't known for having great matches, but he is a natural babyface. He doesn't even need to talk because his facial expressions are just that spot on. Each time Gable insults him, we see Otis disassociate, and we begin counting down to the inevitable breaking point. When will Otis finally stand up to his abuser and demand justice, not only for himself, but for stablemates Maxine and Tozawa?
You have proven yourself, beyond a shadow of a doubt, to be the biggest disappointment of them all.
Gable gets another chance at the title at King of the Ring in a triple threat match, but Sami pins the other man in the match, Bronson Reed. But he's able to talk Sami into one more match in Scotland. Corey Graves, an announcer I usually detest, makes a great point by saying that taking Gable away from Zayn is like taking Master Splinter away from the Turtles, which is just classic heel trolling because Sami has already beaten Gable twice since winning the IC title. Kind of reminds me of something ridiculous Bobby the Brain Heenan or Jesse the Body Ventura would say back in the day as a color commentator.
The match is, I think, really good. It's not what you think, though. It typically, like, this is how AEW would do the match. It's two of the company's workhorses. They put on spectacular athleticism. They wow and impress the audience with, let's admit it, mostly choreographed spots. And then we move on after the match. But what makes this match so much more interesting is the context. And so much of what makes this match great to me isn't what happens in the ring. Like, we've seen Sami Zayn and Chad Gable wrestle before. We know what they can do as two great athletic competitors. What makes this match so much better is everything that happens outside the ring, especially with Otis and Maxine. Like, there's this brilliant spot halfway through the match where Chad Gable goes outside the ring kind of frustrated. He's kind of doing the tropey, I can't beat this guy. But he doesn't do it like he's throwing a tantrum. He walks over, he picks up the Intercontinental Championship, and everybody's saying like, oh, drop it, it's not yours, you haven't earned it yet. And then he just hands it off to Maxine, like, and you're like, why did he give it to Maxine? And then he gets back in the ring, and then he distracts the referee. So then that gives Maxine, because Sami is like resting, he's recuperating in the ropes because he's tired. So Maxine has this opportunity, which Gable foresaw, to whack Sami in the face with the IC title, and she doesn't do it. The IC title lineage, like, the Intercontinental title was originally known as the Workhorse Championship, starting back in like the late 80s, when smaller guys, they were still like 230, 240 pound guys, but this is back when everybody was doing steroids. Everybody was juiced. Macho Man Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat had their classic Intercontinental Championship match at WrestleMania 3 that a lot of people would say overshadowed the main event between Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan. Then you had the Bret Hart Mr. Perfect match in 1991 at SummerSlam, which I think is the perfect encapsulation of not just two of the great like smaller workers. Again, smaller. These guys were like weighed 230, 240 pounds. But what made that match so brilliant was not just the two guys' athletic prowess, but the little moments. Like, and it's this is what makes wrestling so entertaining, is when you kind of lose yourself in it and you can take it seriously, but also the really hilarious, silly moments. Like in the 91 SummerSlam match between Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, there's a moment where Bret Hart punches Mr. Perfect's manager at the time, who is this guy just named Coach. Never really made it in wrestling. I think this is what he's most known for, is this match. And Bobby the Brain Heenan on commentary goes, "He just hit a man with glasses." And it's such a funny moment, and that's what makes this match so memorable, is all the stuff that's happening outside with Maxine and Otis, and it's so over the top, and a lot of it is just nonverbal, it's brilliant. It's brilliant storytelling.
After Maxine refuses to whack Gable, Gable forces her to get up on the ring to reprimand her. Sami goes for the haluva kick, but Gable senses it and moves, causing Sami to stop in his tracks, making sure not to hit Maxine. But as he's asking Maxine if she's okay like the gentleman he is, Gable ambushes him with the Chaos Theory. Sami kicks out at 2 99/100ths. Gable goes back outside to yell more at Maxine. Now it's time for the biggest face of the match, Otis, to shine. He steps between Maxine and Gable, and the crowd erupts. No words, no impressive wrestling holds, just a glare. Sami Zayn takes this opportunity to hit a tope con hero, but Otis takes the bullet for Gable. Gable then dashes to the top rope and hilariously hits a moonsault on both Zayn and Otis. Michael Cole is fired up on commentary, imploring Otis to wake up. Cole's voice is so loud and desperate that it distorts the audio, which is something you never witness during the Vince McMahon era, which, if you don't know, Vince McMahon would talk into the headset, pretty much forcing Cole to use certain WWE mannerisms, but again, that's for another day. Zayn counters an ankle lock attempt outside, which sends Gable flying into an quote-unquote inadvertent chop block to Maxine's leg, which is already in a boot. So Otis carries Maxine to the back, Zayn hits a distracted Chad with a haluva kick in the corner, and that's it. And just look at this sell job from Chad Gable here. I don't know where the story of Chad Gable goes from here. Otis has abandoned him. The Intercontinental title continues to elude him. It is often said in wrestling that the money is in the chase. In the olden days, the hero would be denied time after time after time, until finally, at just the right moment, he'd finally overcome the odds and win the championship. Chad Gable never won the title as a hero, and worse, he couldn't even win it when he became the villain. Now he's just a selfish and manipulative loser who has lost the respect of his co-worker, but even worse, his junior cadets. During the post-Clash at the Castle Raw, the Alpha Academy looks to have officially disbanded. Braun Strowman defeats Gable in what is essentially a squash match, knocking him down the pecking order. I can't see into the future, so I don't know what WWE's plans are with Chad Gable, but it does seem a little odd that in real life, Chad Gable's contract was renewed with the company around the same time as this angle. Booking a top mid-carder to lose clean to a much larger opponent and seemingly halt his momentum sounds a lot like the way Vince McMahon used to book, so I can't help but wonder if Vince is actually gone from the company. It could be a coincidence, or maybe I'm making too much out of this and Gable will continue to be featured prominently. He did vow to win the Money in the Bank during a recent promo after all. In either case, I can't be mad at WWE for booking him this way. I find it painful, but also extremely funny. And I'm sure Chad Gable, the actual person, is okay with this. He's been consistently featured as a star for a while now, and he's making a ton of money. I'm sure he's fine. And if it does lead to him being buried, well, I could just be fickle and stop watching WWE content again until they find a way to hook me back in, which they probably will do. Being a wrestling fan can mean a lot of pain, but it's also a business that never takes a week off. But maybe I can take a week off. Thanks for watching.